Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. And this episode is all about training research software engineers, that is. Of course, a number of excellent training sources exist already, like, for instance, the Code Refineries and the Carpentries, to name but a few. And still, with increasing demand in software engineers, there is a gap to provide training on a broader and often more advanced level. In the UK, for instance, there's the Universe HPC project that aims to address this, but also in other countries, the training gap for RSEs has become a hot topic, and indeed during my visit at the German RSE conference in February 2023, Heidi Seibold dedicated an entire and a very well-attended workshop on this subject. And so in January this year, 2023, I met with Jeremy, Malvika, Radovan and Weronika to discuss the need for training research software engineers and what we can do about it. They all come from different institutions and all have unique perspectives, which I hope you will find interesting and which I hope will trigger further discussions and actions. And here now the interview. Hello everybody, thank you very much for coming to the show. It's great to see you all and Happy New Year, since we're still in January when we record this. And so I welcome today Weronika, Malvika, Jeremy and Radovan. Before we go talking about training gap for research software engineering, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself. I try to do this alphabetically, so I think that puts you on the spot, Jeremy.
Right, thank you, Peter. Yes, so I'm Jeremy Cohen. I'm a Research Software Engineering Fellow and Director of Research Software Engineering Strategy at Imperial College London. My RSE Fellowship is funded by the UK's Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, the EPSRC, which is part of the UK Research and Innovation, UKRI group. I have a background in computer science and e-science, and I've worked a lot on distributed computing, particularly in the applied work with multidisciplinary research projects and collaborations. And my focus more recently has been on research software and trying to improve the understanding that we have about how research software is developed and the policies and strategies and the community elements that support this.
Thank you very much. Malvika.
Hi, I'm Malvika Sharan. I am a senior researcher for the Tools, Practices and Systems research program at the Alan Turing Institute. My main focus is on open research and community building. I lead a team of community managers and co-lead the project called the Turing Way, which is a community-led guide on data science. We try to compile best practices and resources developed by experts from all around the world on reproducibility, ethics, inclusive and collaborative research. I'm also a co-founder for Open Life Science, which is a mentoring and training program that empowers researchers to gain an understanding of open science principle, build collaboration with experts all around the world, and adopt best practices in the context of their communities.
Thank you very much. Radovan, you're next.
So my name is Radovan Bast. I work at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø in northern Norway. I'm part of the Code Refinery project, where we teach good enough practices on the intermediate level to students and researchers so that they write better code, so that they know how to use resource software engineering tools, that they use them in a better way. I'm part of the Nordic resource software engineer team community, and also recently started building a local RSE team here at the UiT, and I absolutely look forward to our discussion.
And finally, last but not least, Weronika.
Hello, my name is Veronika Filinger. I work at EPC at the University of Edinburgh, and my official job title is HPC Project Manager, but I'm also the Program Director for Online MSc in HPC and HPC with Data Science, and I teach one of the biggest courses on that program, which is Practical Introduction to HPC, and I'm also involved in a number of different international education-related activities and initiatives, including SIG HPC Education Chapter and International HPC Certification Forum.
Well, thank you very much. So the subject for today's discussion is a training gap. And this came about when Jeremy, you and I and Neil Juhong from the Software Sustainability Institute met in Newcastle at the last RSE conference in 2022. The reason why I would like to have a panel today is I would like to know from you whether you agree actually there is a training gap and what that training gap consists of. What are we missing today?
I actually think there are many different gaps on many different levels, starting from the actual content that's missing from people to learn from, to even the way we are thinking about it and ways for people to identify what are the things that they do not know. And then finally, going forward, another gap is for us to actually know what's out there, because there have been many efforts trying to, keep track of different training courses, resources, and so on, creating repositories of content. But it's such a hard task to actually keep track of everything. And there are so many different projects and so many different people working on so many different things that it's kind of hard to understand what's out there and what you could be using and how you could be using it.
So I agree fully with what Weronika has said. I think for me, I see this kind of gap in the training very much from the perspective of people who are looking to learn new skills in the research software space. And there's a lot of material out there. There's some fantastic material from a number of different groups to learn basic research computing skills. But we also see people that we perhaps work with, people we know in the community who are experts on working with high performance computing and exascale computing and the very specialist types of skills that you need to be able to manage those kind of software and infrastructure elements that you see in modern research projects. And I feel that there's a very big gap between how you get from the basic skills that are out there in, the basic training that's out there in quite large quantities from different groups, and increasingly some intermediate level training as well. How do you make the leap from that level to being one of these very experienced people who knows inside out HPC infrastructures and how to write code for exascale infrastructures and so on? So I guess the concept of training gap for me is that kind of, that space, how you fill that space and how we can ensure that in the longer term that is managed in a way that we can get the level of research software engineering expertise that we need to ensure that science is not impeded by the lack of kind of skills in that space.
Yeah, very much aligned with Weronika and Jeremy. I think that the research software engineers are expected to have certain level of expertise already when they come on these positions. They come with strong coding skills and they have been taught in their education or self-training. So when they come to this space where they're already considered experts, it's very difficult for them to exactly what Weronika said. They don't know what they don't know. They're working in this environment where data science and software engineering tools and practices keep evolving. So for them, there's this strong need to keep abreast with what's happening right now. What is the best practices right now? Who do we learn it from? So in my opinion, there's a need for, I think this might be my community expertise talking, but like for them to understand what community do they belong to, where they can go and ask questions, where they can learn from their peers, where they can see other people implementing best practices not in theory, but actually in their work that they can test. So there's a lot of that peer-based networked learning that is missing in my opinion. But also, I feel like research engineers, like any other researcher, need to understand what leadership in that space for them means. How can they build connection with other people? How they can train their mentees or their team members? How they can apply equity, diversity, inclusion perspective in the work that they do so that they can have a holistic understanding of the technology they're building. Not just that, does it work, but does it actually impact negatively anybody? And if so, how can we make sure that we mitigate those?
Okay, Radovan.
Yeah, I really like how there are so many different levels of gaps, and maybe I can add 2 or 3 more. One thing that I find interesting is that RSEs often come from either the research side, PhDs, postdocs, or they often come from the software development company or private sector side. And both have a lot to bring to the table, and we can learn from each other. But there is this gap that we need to close. There is also, I see that there is a gap between people, because many RSEs don't even know that they are RSEs. They may work isolated as part of a research group doing RSE work, and it would be very beneficial for them to meet other RSEs. And finally, one more gap that I can see emerging is that different countries and different places have a different understanding of what an RSE is and provide a different maturity of the RSE path. We can also work on closing the gap through international training events, help sharing and adjusting the understanding and the role of and the path.
Thank you very much. Weronika, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to expand a little bit on what Malvika was saying, but it also links nicely with what Radovan just said. I think the training gaps can be very individual as well, depending on your background. The things that you have learned before you become an RSE and then the things that you are working on as an RSE will mean that you know different things, and some things might be basic for you, whether other might be advanced, and for someone else it will be completely opposite because the things that they are doing or were doing in the past were just so different. So having that community connection and exchanging ideas and sort of making sure people are aware of what other people are doing really helps, because then you can both identify what you know, maybe judge your own level a little bit better, and then help other people around you learn the skills that you are really proficient at, and then learn from them the skills that you are maybe not as proficient at because you just simply had no opportunity to use them in the past.
When I hear training gap, there is, of course, a lot of material out there when it comes to software development. What I'm looking at is the case where you have a PhD student, he's done, say, a biology degree, they had to do a lot of R, or they had to do a lot of Python, or whatever it is, and then they get a job as an RSE. So what special skills do you think that they need that isn't covered by the training courses that are generally available to every software engineer? Why do we need to have different training courses at all, I guess my question. Malvika.
I think this is very much what we discussed, that it could be a very individual journey. So there isn't a task list that you go to. It's really a lot about what do I need right now? Where can I find it? So there is definitely the immediate gap in the landscape that I see is about the spaces for reflection. So it's not probably providing just another training, but providing more spaces where people can come together and exchange what they're working on and learn from each other. Maybe it's not about 2 days training that, of course, software carpentry does really well, which is very effective for a novice learner. But it's really about how can we allow them to have that journey after that, once they have gained these skills and once they come across some problems. But also really a lot about interdisciplinarity. Research software engineering is functioning in the space of interdisciplinarity. Same research can be applied in completely different sectors. Can we actually teach people how to build better collaboration, build software that are built on the basis of interdisciplinarity, built with the perspective that it would be transferred in a completely different domain? So not thinking just in the current use case, but what is the reusability? Can somebody else reproduce it in some other place? So there's a lot skills that are not explicitly research software, but it's just the best practice that they need to learn as they start developing and working on some project.
I think I absolutely agree with that. And I think that part of this challenge in the kind of landscape and how we understand how training fits in and where the gaps are and so on is, I guess, around more about understanding why is research software development different to regular software development, and or is it different? There's a lot of discussion about that. One of the big challenges in this space is it's all very well to learn the technical skills, and obviously the technical skills apply in some ways in the same as in research software as they do in any form of software development. But I guess the other side of this is how the kind of research side of things fits into the landscape, and how people who write software in a research context are using some skills that are the same, but also are using some different processes because of the way that research works. One element here is around kind of the drivers for metrics and progression in research. Obviously, software is increasingly being recognized as a kind of first-class research output, but that is a slow process. And in the meantime, the drivers for people who write software in the research space are often quite different. Their drivers are to complete a piece of research to get some research results and to be able to publish that using traditional methods that support their aims to get recognition in the research community and to develop their career and so on. All of this is really important. Software needs to become recognized as a first-class output before some of the elements of the landscape that we're talking about become more practical to apply in the research space.
Weronika.
So again, that's something that Malvika mentioned. research software engineers, when they need to learn something, that's usually task driven. They just need to do something. They don't know how to do it, so they need to figure it out. And then they try looking for courses. And there are many issues at this point, because some of them are part of really small groups, and it's hard for them to justify spending time to go somewhere for a long training course. Many of the courses are actually delivered still in person only. It might be hard for them to actually get the money and funding and time to go and learn something. But in other cases, courses are often bundled with so many different skills to take like half a day or a day or even 2 days. But the thing that they need to learn might be like, just taking a few hours. Quite often they might say like, oh, actually, I can't justify spending 2 days and then traveling to that location just so that I can learn this one specific thing that I need to do my job. So having something that would allow more flexibility, kind of mix and match with courses and skills would be ideal. But that would require us to having very well-defined pathways through different skills and different courses. And that in itself will be extremely difficult to create, simply because people have, diverse backgrounds, and the things they know are just so different, and the things they need are also different. Like the whole landscape of possibilities is just huge.
Indeed. Radovan.
Yeah, I like the thought, how can we make these events more rewarding? And maybe we also need training in training. How can we improve the online training experience? I also wanted to connect to what was discussed earlier, is that about which additional skills, and it really seems to boil down also to communication with across discipline. So I wanted to connect to that. That is also my experience, something that I'm trying to learn. We talk about the same thing, but maybe in different languages. How can I collaborate with a researcher who is maybe not as interested in the technical details as I might be? They have different goals, but how can I help them to achieve what they want instead of what I find super cool and my favorite tool? Communicating, I also wanted to add 2 more things. One is marketing. How can we market our work, our success stories, also the things that didn't work, so that we become more visible? And it's also about time management. It's really busy in all the fields, learning to say no, time management, mental health. And it was mentioned earlier, but it is so important, also training in diversity, equity, inclusion.
Well, I think we identified a large number of gaps. Which ones are the most important for you? I mean, where's the most pressing needs? Do you have kind of a mental list that you say, okay, this is the top 3 that I have, and I really think we should tackle that?
I think for me, probably the most important thing I feel is just how we get the skills into the community. So I think that there's a lot of skills that we know need to be there for people to be able to achieve, the more advanced research software development that is required as computing infrastructure becomes more advanced, as data increases, etc. So for me, I think that's the kind of top of the list, is just what are the approaches that you need to use to get those skills into the community, to make people understand why they need to learn those skills, why those skills are important. That links strongly with the points that Radovan made previously. I think several of the points there are things that, that come into this. It's not just about writing the software, but the skill. When I say skills, I think that encompasses a whole range of different aspects as well. So that would be the top thing for me.
So I have been recently thinking, well, not recently, for a long time, but most recently, very much attached to the ChatGPT software, right? We have all been talking about it. We are also talking about different AI technology that are building on non-open source data. They have some sort of ethical implication on marginalized communities. And I often wonder, why aren't software engineers who are behind this technology asking the question, what is the negative impact of the software that we are contributing to? I understand that their job is to build a really, really good software, but I don't think that they should not take responsibility of asking this really, really important question of what would happen at the end when my software is out there in public and people are using it. Could they use it to target a minority group? Could they use it to target someone vulnerable? Could we actually harm the society that we are hoping to benefit? And I really, really think that that's my priority. Can we build a critical thinker? In general, my advices are not really specific for RSE, but about anybody working in research. Can we make them a good critical thinker? Can we make them a leader who is not just following someone, but really asking important questions. I think that that's really a lot about how do we mentor them? How do we actually show them in practice? How can we show them the good people who are asking these questions and rewarded for it? Because a lot what we see is when someone questions it, they get fired, they get sued, they get excluded from the community where they're asking this question. So how can we actually build a secure system where asking important question is rewarded?
Radovan.
It's so important, such an important point. I mean, ethics in software, in data, now with emergence of machine learning, AI, generative AI, there is so much to learn. The one thing I wanted to add here is, and Malvika has mentioned it, is mentoring and mentoring in mentoring. I think everybody should have a mentor. And I was asking, like, who is my mentor right now? I think everybody should have a mentor. There is so much to learn. In the past, I have often tried to fix problems. Researcher comes with a problem and I try to solve it instead of properly listening and assisting so that they solve it. And the second skill that I want to become better at also is the better market success stories failures. So I often thought, well, we did some interesting work, we did a lot of work, but now summarize it. It has been maybe hidden behind a ticketing system, or it has been hidden in a one-on-one discussion or behind an acknowledgement, but to make it really visible, more blog posts, more podcasts, more screencasts, more of these to share our work, make it more visible.
Weronika, anything to add from you?
Yeah, so I think many things were already mentioned, but I will probably just add more about collaborating skills and how we can work better with other people, with actually working on the same piece of code at the same time and making sure you are actually sticking to the same style and so on and not getting in the way of each other, to actually working better across different multidisciplinary teams as well. And that, I guess that sort of links with project management skills as well, which are not really being taught to people. And at some point, as you progress career level, you need to do some project management as well. And again, that's not something that's someone will teach you. You need to figure it out on your own by observing either other people are just trying and failing and learning from that. And the other thing that Radovan mentioned is really that better connection with community and making sure no one is isolated. And if they have, if they would like to get connected and actually get mentoring experience, then they have an easy way of doing that. Because for people who are isolated in a sense that, they're maybe the only research software engineer in the group, it might be really hard to find someone who has similar role at the institution. So we need to find a way of making sure they can connect with people doing similar things in different places so that they can get this sense of community and support as well.
When it comes down to it, what we're really thinking, we need to go beyond just the bare knuckle software development skills, because, obviously people get this from somewhere else, but there is something in the space where we work that requires more, like, for instance, the collaboration and the interaction, the knowledge sharing, and also the success sharing. And of course, then there is the question of how do we actually get this into the community? That is the question that Jeremy, a very practical thing. So how do we actually teach that? So maybe we can start with that, because there actually are a number of courses, as we said at the beginning. There's Code Refineries, there's Software Carpentries. What are your ideas of creating a landscape and a map that allows people to say, okay, if I want to do this, then I can go there? Are there any kind of ideas that you could share with us, how we can approach this? Weronika.
There's so many different groups of people working on this right now, and they're reaching their own conclusions, and they're working on development of courses. They're trying to figure out the pathways, different skills, skill definition, and so on. And I think part of the problem is that those efforts are not really connected. So it's hard to see if there are any overlaps between the work that different groups are doing, and because the work itself is funded by different funding bodies, often in different countries, and so it can be really complicated to actually, bring everyone together and say, like, okay, this is what we agree as the whole community, and this is what everyone will be following from now on. That's pretty much impossible. So I think having more opportunities at conferences, for example, where people can actually freely discuss and exchange ideas, is definitely a way to go. Again, I mentioned people trying to keep track of different courses and so on by creating repositories. Praise in Europe was trying to have a very comprehensive repository table of all the courses being run across Europe and so on. I know Exceed and now Access in the US was trying to do a similar thing. There were efforts like that, but there was always the issue of who is going to maintain that repository, who is going to add all those courses, like who is going to find them, and who is going to update it regularly enough for people to actually use it. So it's kind of like a vicious circle. No one is updating it, so no one is looking at it, so no one has a reason to update it. Something that I was thinking of recently is maybe we should have sort of almost another track at a research software engineering conference where people can submit different courses, have a group of people as a part of the committee looking at those submissions. Obviously would have some metadata saying like, oh, this is the information you need to submit. And then they would look at it and maybe, produce a report at the end so that everyone attending the conference can get access to the report and see like, oh, okay, so this is the list of training materials or resources or courses or whatever that currently exist. And then the next year, something similar would happen. So that would automatically be updated. But because that effort would be sort of outsourced to people to submit it, it could potentially be easier to actually maintain and make useful for the whole community.
Malvika, yeah, you wanted to say something.
I'm from bioinformatics background. While I was finishing my PhD and started my job, I learned about an organization called Elixir, which is an international infrastructure for bioinformatics. And there is a group of people who built a platform called mygoblet.org, and that mygoblet literally tries to do what we're talking about. Can we connect different training activities happening in the landscape and centralize them so people can actually identify those? And I feel like that Society of RSE can take similar role for the RSE skills. So Society of RSE is now really building network with local RSE networks, for example, in South Africa, in India, Asia overall, New Zealand, Australia. These are few that I'm aware of. These are connected with Society of RSE and they have their own page. But there is definitely a possibility to centralize the activities being offered all around. I love the idea that Weronika shared. And I also totally support the point that who will maintain this, because a lot of Society of RSE work is being done by volunteers. Often volunteer labor, in my opinion, shouldn't be relied on just because they're working for free. It doesn't mean that that's where we should build our infrastructure. We should try to really think about, can we build dedicated position where people are informed and doing the job that they are designed to do. One more point that I wanted to bring is open science. I haven't yet mentioned that. So open source is a very good place for people to start playing around with ideas and skills that might not be completely relevant for their work right now, but they're interested in or they want to build their skills on. They can engage with different open source communities. I think the open source skills would be really, really interesting. Definitely research software engineers are very busy. So can we build their career to actually make spaces for these kind of activities? That's also something to think about.
Yeah, there were really 3-4 excellent problems raised. I wanted to comment on two of those. One was the challenge that we really feel that many excellent projects exist. There are many good efforts, international, national, regional, that address this, but we need a map to navigate it. But it is difficult to maintain it. I think the key will be we need to make it rewarding for the projects to add themselves to such a map. And this would bring me to the second comment on the challenge that I was thinking. So there is a high demand in training. I think also there is a high supply in training. It should be easy to connect them because now we can teach and learn online, but it's not easy. And the problem was identified. We have funding silos. One thing that I thought would be cool if that was easier is if people from Norway could help out at the workshop in Netherlands or Germany or UK or US. This way we would know about these other efforts, we would learn, because helping out is one of the best learning experiences. But the problem there is we need then protection from the management. I wish the management would say, spend 1 day a week and help out at courses organized by other people. And they will come and help out at your courses. And this way, it might also be more rewarding for us to advertise our efforts in these maps so that we can attract knowledge and collaborators.
There's a lot of I think really important points made, and one question that I don't have an answer to, and I don't know if it's something we need to answer, but I have basically: can you have too much training material? At one level, yes, it's very difficult to manage very large quantities of material from lots of different groups. But on the other hand, I think there will always be people who want to produce material. We increasingly see now, I think, training material starting to be peer reviewed, and I think that's a really important development. If you've got good quality training material, you possibly can't have too much of it. But I think that at the same time, training should be at some level a personal journey for people. One pathway is not right for everybody, clearly. We've heard about various different developments in this space. One thing that I want to mention briefly is a project called Universe HPC, which is funded under the UK's Excalibur research programme. Universe HPC, which both Weronika and I are linked to, is looking again to develop pathways to see how we can understand what's out there in terms of material and develop these pathways that link from the kind of basic level skills right through to much more advanced skills. But also linking to the points made about mentoring before, I feel this is actually somewhere where mentors can be very, very important, because probably one of the main ways, I think, to understand what you need to learn and how you need to learn it and what the opportunities are is probably to talk to somebody who's perhaps been down that path before, who's had that experience before, and who knows, what the options are and who can tell you what their experience was of different things. Was this good? Was this the right way to do it? Do they wish they did something differently? There's a lot of different threads in this, and it's not just about gathering the skills, but obviously we've heard so much around community and equity and diversity aspects and so on in there. So I think there's a huge number of threads to pull together here.
At the same time, I feel that we talk about a map or a landscape, right? But putting together such a map, as Weronika, I think, quite rightly said initially, that's pretty much impossible because it's huge. And so the question is it actually desirable to actually put a lot of effort into something that ultimately we all will realize is going to be incomplete? And it also begs the question, at least in my mind, and I've been thinking about this actually for a while, what does teaching actually mean? I mean, how does content get across? Okay, there's the classroom, there's online training, there may be the textbooks, and then there is the mentoring scheme. And I would like to hear from you what your thoughts are. Are we missing a trick here in terms of modern technology or some approaches to getting content, not only content across, but what we also want to get across is also certain types of behavior, like, for instance, thinking critically. This was what Malvika said.
Going back to this, how complex it is and how pretty much impossible it is, I think having something is better than having nothing. Even if it's not complete, as long as say this is an example or this is a pathway that you could follow, but keep in mind this is not everything. So make it flexible and make it work for you. That's definitely viable in itself. And then sort of going back to what Jeremy was saying, is it possible to have too much training materials and then linking that to what you were saying, how we should be teaching or what teaching is all about? I think it's important to have the same content and the same skills being taught in different ways. Mm-hmm. Because we're all different. We have different backgrounds. The thing we know, our experiences are very different. And the way our brains are designed are different as well. So we learn in different ways. And the things that could be work really well for me and I could be learning really fast might be really unsuitable for someone else. So having this diversity of approaches in teaching is incredibly important. And for some people that would be, just sitting down in a classroom environment for the whole day, going to the lectures, then doing some practical sessions and then move on to the next thing. But for someone else, it will be more about reading an article, doing a reflection, then trying it out. And, there are just so many different ways you could be teaching, both in person and online. The point is to remember that it should be a personal journey and everyone is different. So we need different approaches and we sort of need to make sure the way we teach works for as many people as possible.
Okay, so that means that it's basically, so we have a subject to teach, but we do that in different ways to accommodate sort of people with different training approaches.
Exactly.
Malvika.
There are 3 ways that I have seen these work in the in the infrastructure of like data science or training. One is definitely dedicated training space. For example, we've already mentioned the Carpentries. The Carpentries also provides reusable infrastructure where you can actually build your own training material. And they have this centralized place, which is called incubator, where people who have built untested training material can submit their training material. Someone else can take it and test it in their own environment. And these dedicated training, let's say 2 days, are very, very important because these are the places to ask bigger question, together solve some technical problem. Then comes the project-based learning, where someone brings a project and asks a variety of questions that happens throughout the development of that project. So for example, in Open Life Science, we ask people to bring a project where they can apply open science practices. And throughout the development, which is 16-week long, they would be going through different learning phases, and they'll go back and reflect on what these practices mean in the context of their own project, and as well as other technical problems they come across. And then finally, the hackathon kind of event, where it is a week or 2 week long. People come together as a team and they try to tackle a common problem, learning from each other. Those are also super, super important because then you come across real world problem that you may not have come across in the classroom 2 days training. We apply something similar in the Turing way. We organize book dashes, which are secure places for people to come and work on something that they have always wanted to work on, but just they hadn't had the time. So can we create those safe environment for people to say, okay, for this 1 week, all I'm doing is working on that particular problem, and I'll learn from that.
Radovan.
So support everything that's been said, and I don't want to repeat it. Maybe a few more things in addition is that one sentence that I like, somebody told me, is that if you want to become really good at something, then work together with somebody who is really good at something. So it's about collaboration, it's about teamwork. Don't teach alone when we train. We really like the concept of teaching together, co-teaching. So it's two people having a conversation instead of one person. Also, don't learn alone. Maybe sign up as a team. And also when preparing for this podcast, I was thinking, what are my 5 favorite tools, apps, techniques that I use most? How did I start using them? Did I read about them in a book, or, well, actually I saw somebody else use them. So it was, and again, I'm back to mentoring, apprenticeship, sharing, looking somebody else over the shoulder, collaborating on a project. So that at least that's how I started using many things that I do now daily. But everybody learns differently. I don't think there is this one best way for everybody.
Jeremy.
So I think, Peter, it was you that mentioned just at the start of this section, you asked the question whether training pathways are useful in the context that there's just so much stuff to learn. And I think clearly, as we've heard from everybody in this discussion, it's very much a multidimensional problem. There are so many different layers to this, and that's probably the main challenge here. But I think, for me, pathways are useful at a purely technical level. So just to give you effectively a mapping of different types of skills. It doesn't tell you how to learn them, but it tells you what's out there. I think it's useful to know from that perspective, I know this, this, and this. Can I look at a map that tells me kind of what I might want to think about learning next? So I see that as useful, and I kind of see this maybe as 3 layers. So I think I see that as the sort of base layer is this sort of pathway of just pure technical skills. Then I think on top of that, you've got the various things we've talked about around collaboration, equity, diversity, and inclusion skills, and sort of understanding different ways to work with different people in areas of the community where, as was mentioned before, people use different languages or terminology within different technical domains. And then I think perhaps the top layer, and this is something I haven't thought through in enough detail yet, but I feel the top layer is around the kind of the learning approaches. How do you work best in terms of learning different things? What are the skills? And as Radovan said, if you think about how you started using different tools, what were the ways you kind of learned about those? How did you come to that? And I guess the challenge is how you kind of weave a path through all of these different layers across a wide space. At one level, pathways are very useful, but equally, once you look at it in this multidimensional context, it's probably actually, that's a lot more difficult to represent in any way. And obviously that kind of concept of a personal learning journey is very much kind of how you weave that path through this thing. It's not something that's easy to be concrete about. Great if we could teach people how to help others to find their way through that.
I think we're coming now to the end of the podcast, so I'm looking a little bit at the time. But Weronika, you wanted to have something, and then maybe you can wrap up.
Right, just one more point. I think we have a wonderful variety of different in-person training events. And that's great. But the whole community is still so biased towards people who can travel to those events. And there are many people who cannot for various reasons. And I teach online. I know how difficult that is, but at the same time, I kind of feel there is so many opportunities in the online space that we should try to make use of them, because really, by not including people who cannot travel, we're missing out as a community.
Well, thank you very much. I think we had a lot of ideas, a lot of great ideas. I quite like a number of them, and it's probably going to take me a while to summarize all of that. But I think we actually do see the beginnings of how to tackle that. So we do have a mentorship program now, I think here in the UK at least, maybe in other countries as well. There were some excellent ideas from earlier. Jeremy and I we're kind of experimenting now with something that is online based and podcast based. I mean, there might be various different routes, because what we do agree on, there are many different ways in which content needs to be delivered because people learn differently. So I do hope that we all take 2023 and beyond as an opportunity to make at least some of that happen. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion today. I wish you all the best for the future and good luck with the training.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.